there are quite a number of questions actually already have come in on Slido, and a number have been voted right at the top, so you can vote for your favorite questions. So I'd like to invite a number of the speakers to come back in, and we have that first question from Bob. And Bethan, would you, Bethan or Brian, but I think Bethan, you kind of answered this already about security. Would you like to come in on this?
Yes, so our data is stored in object storage at the moment, and as I showed, when you upload a data set, then it's not open to the community at large. It's just available to you, and you're able to open that up and give people access in the way that I showed, through groups or through making it public.
Thank you. Thanks, Bethan.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Yeah, Brian?
It's not actually, we don't actually routinely encrypt it, I don't believe, though, for example.
Yeah, it's not encrypted at rest, no. So
No.
We'd obviously do encrypt in flight with HTTPS and SFTP and stuff. We could look at encryption at rest if we had, you know, sensitive data sets, etc., but it's not something we do at the minute. And yeah.
This is an area that we are aware that we, you know, as we get on more sort of sensitive or commercial data on the system, we do need to continually refine. We had a really interesting conversation with the University of Cranfield a few weeks ago, which obviously has a particular interest in, you know, particular research groups there working on security aspects and defence aspects, and they you know, they were particularly concerned about, you know, what we do security. So I think there's a lot we can learn from communities like that on what the requirements are and what we need to support those things. So yeah, we have a security model which is very suitable for the sort of data sharing and model sharing that we foresee with research, but we do, you know, we want to learn more and enhance that for some of the more secure and sensitive applications.
Okay, so who would like to take the next question on board around real-time stream of data?
You can start us off again, perhaps. So at the moment, we don't have streamed data on the Daphne platform, but we are in the earlier stages of putting together an architecture to support that. We are working at the moment with the urban observatories to be taking in data near real time, so every 5 minutes or so at the moment, but then that same architecture we'll use to expand and bring streams of data onto Daphne.
And it's probably worth mentioning that this was not part of the original specification. So I think this requirement came late when we realized that this is a great platform for digital twin. And I think that looking forward, hopefully with further funding to extend the work and probably repurpose or add this functionality. But this is clearly something that has to happen if to realize that vision of a platform for digital twins.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, quite right. When the project was originally conceived about 5 years ago, the digital twin agenda wasn't so prominent, so it wasn't sort of baked in from that very early stage, but is something we are now adapting to add, and certainly over the next year, I can foresee that this would be a major stream of activity that we do.
Okay, so we've had quite a couple of questions around GitHub integration and how it will link, how the Daphne platform would link. A GitHub link won't trace code version unless it links to a specific version. So Docker files should specify versions. We've also got this question up here. Could you talk around that subject area, maybe, I don't know, Tom?
Yeah, so quite right. Obviously, I think it was Bob who asked the question. In the Docker file that I showed, it was just linked to the GitHub repository for the Covet model, but it wasn't attached to any particular hash within that repo. But obviously, at time of building that image, it would just get the latest version. So at the point you build the image, it's then static from there. So as Rose said in her presentation, we are planning to add metadata to the model itself to say what the GitHub repository that came from was. So if you build your image at a specific point in time, you could then reference the version that was built against in the metadata, and that won't change. We don't build the images on the back end. They're sort of static as they are uploaded. But you know, if it makes sense to you to build it to a specific version of that GitHub repo, then that's fine too. You could just put that in the Docker file. In terms of Git integration, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit, Rose, about the work that you've been doing recently on the UDM project to have automatically deploy stuff from GitHub into Daphne. It'd be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I could talk about that. So yeah, as Tom says, GitHub has its own built-in CI/CD that you can now use called GitHub Workflows, and within those you run actions and you can create your own custom actions. So I have created one of these custom actions that can be used now on Daphne if you know the right action name to use. I think we are looking at getting that put onto the GitHub marketplace for actions eventually, but there's a few hoops that GitHub have you jump through in order to get that onto the marketplace, so then it will be discoverable. But as Tom says, this action allows you to point, so you can set up an action to automatically build your Docker file into a Docker image, and then if you point your the action that I wrote at that Docker image at a model definition file and give it a Daphne like username and password, which you can do through GitHub secrets so that you don't expose your password or anything like that, then the action will take those files and automatically upload them to Daphne. And so you can customize that to either run every time you commit to your GitHub repo, or every time you push to a certain branch, or whenever you trigger a release. So you can fully customize that when the action runs. And then we even have exposed, like you can expose certain environment variables through that actions. And then if you really wanted to inject like the commit hash into the mod definition before you pass it to the action, if you want to have that traceability of the specific version.
You're on mute, Marion.
Sorry. I think that hopefully answers the GitHub questions. There's a question, I think, for you, Christian, or Daniel. When did you start the traffic digital twin, and what differences have you seen before and after COVID?
Right, yeah, I'll start answering that. So we started developing the model for predictions in June last year. And at that time, the COVID restrictions were quite recent. And we had data since September, as I said, 2019. So we wanted to make sure that the change in pattern due to lockdown does not impact our predictions. So we tested all the approaches that I've showed in the slides on a date right before the lockdown. So because we are relying heavily on historical data and historical patterns, it makes sense to calibrate this model before the lockdown. Now that there's been restrictions for quite a while, we're confident that there is enough data with patterns that reflect the new behavior in lockdown and restrictions. So we think that the prediction would be quite accurate because historical data covers that type of traffic pattern. Unfortunately, we haven't done any testing to compare this. So because the process afterwards was to transfer this and upload it into Daphne and integrate it with the data stream. So there was not necessarily time to to analyze data afterwards. But it's something that we will very much look forward to do. I think it opens a lot of possibilities now that the model is on Daphne to do this kind of analysis and see the impact of the COVID pandemic. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think this next question is possibly for Andy, Christian and Daniel. The simulation's impressive. How can companies benefit from your results? Have you seen any companies getting involved with your research?
I think it was related to the same modeling, I think, based on the timing when I presented. And there was a follow-up question on this one that explained in more detail, which was referring to logistic companies using the outputs, if you want, of the model to reroute the trucks so that they avoid congested areas and so on. So I think that's a very good point, and it's an action that can be implemented in the feedback loop. So in my slide, I said that we need to close the loop between the model and the real system. And one of the ways to do that is to adjust the traffic lights, for example. But yeah, some sort of feedback into the logistic companies so that they can adjust their journey patterns is definitely another way of closing the loop and optimizing the traffic based on the predictions that we're making. So yeah, it's a good point.
Probably it's worth mentioning that the sensors belong to the city council, so the data we have an agreement to receive this data from them. I think that probably the first beneficiaries that can make use of this traffic forecasting and the modeling. Yeah, we hope to. Once this is expanded, probably we can demonstrate to essentially to other users, stakeholders that may be interested in using the simulation, the model.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on that point? No? Okay.
I suppose
yes.
It's Andy Mills. I guess it would be really useful to think about like the earliest win that we can for any of these models. You know, that's always the approach encouraged by industry, is sort of off ramps for research. So you know, rather than trying to solve everything at once, being able to get a small win. So in our example for aerospace, you know, ultimately we want a complete digital twin of the system, be able to model exactly what's going on. But if that first instance would be to detect more novelty than we can do at the moment, that immediately starts adding value by avoiding disruption. So I think talking to the stakeholders, the council, or the trucking companies to identify what the sort of minimum value proposition might be almost for them, and focusing on addressing that might be a really nice route to get some immediate impact and confidence that it's the right thing to be doing.
And probably at first step to prove the utility of the model is to see how well it compares with what companies like Google provide in terms of information on traffic congestion. And obviously they use different way of gathering data from community sensing, and probably have a lot more data at disposal. That is probably a benchmark we can look into.
Okay, thank you. And we've had a series of, I think they're comments from Joby, and I wondered if any of you would like to come in and make any comments on Joby's comments.
Well, I think Joby is absolutely right. I think that we know that when we start modeling, you have to accept that your model is not going to be perfect. And certainly the complexity of the model should be justified by the purpose. And I think that probably one aspect I try to emphasize is in that level of maturity of a digital twin. I think when you start building one, I think you have to have a very clear purpose in mind. And obviously, there's no point of developing an whole singing and dancing digital twin if all you want is just to have information of what's going on at one given time in your system. And I think that the efforts, modeling efforts, should be justified clearly by the application and essentially the benefits that you'll get out of it. And probably that's what is going on with Andy talks in aviation. I think that they're making an effort in improving the quality of the models because there is value to be added to the data and sort of insights, and in terms of decision making and the quality of decision making and the impact this decision is going to have on efficiency and revenue and so on. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's clearly a valuable point to make. Yeah.
Would any of the Daphne team like to come in at this point?
No, I think that it's absolutely right. I mean, one of the things I think though of doing research and providing a research platform is, you know, there's obviously going to be a lot of testing and trying things out to try and work out whether models are worth building and whether twins are worth building, and so, you know, I think by providing a research platform to make that easier, certainly on running models and simulations and accessing data, I think that just enables that kind of iterative process of trying to work out what is the best approach, what is the best models to use. So yeah, entirely agree with what Joby says there.
Thank you, Brian. So then moving on, we've got a question again from Bob about getting results out of Daphne.
I'll start on this one. I mean, what we've shown so far is, you know, getting results data sets out, sort of what Tom and Rose has shown about you know, getting data sets out. We are, as I mentioned, got under development, nearly ready now, some visualization tools that actually are, and well, you've seen using Jupyter notebooks, and we're adding some enhanced visualization tools, which is ready in prototype. It needs kind of working into the system, and that's kind of thing we're working on, to getting results out that way. So you can get hold of the results that way. We've spoken a lot about user-facing dashboards. Now, a couple of the slides I've shown showed earlier had a couple of user-facing dashboards, if you like, or specialist user interfaces that we built as sort of special examples for pilots, and we can do that, though it does take extra resources to do that. It's something that we have discussed a lot, it can be done. It does require a bit of extra effort, though, to do that. There's another thing that we are also looking at the moment, which I think would also help this, or help people build user-facing dashboards, is we're looking at sort of building a more sort of programmatic, well, we already have APIs, but sort of more programmatic aspects, access, or sort of command line interface aspects onto it, which should make building such dashboards a bit easier for end users, access to something a bit easier perhaps. But yeah, it's still something we are asked about a lot, we asked about a good deal. That, you know, we think that the interface that we have is quite usable, but we appreciate would be good to get dashboards. But it's very hard to do in general. You know, every single sort of workflow may require it, or scenario may require its own dashboard, and that is hard to do in general. So so it is a sort of special jobs we have to do. So we have to provide a sort of generic methods, and then allow people to build dashboards on top of that, I guess. Don't know if there's any thoughts from anyone else on the team.
Yeah, I guess just I think if you're hosting your own dashboard, that's kind of fine. You could just make use of our APIs, or hopefully, as Brian said, the CLIs that we're about to start work on to sort of fuel that front end. If you're like thinking to host that on Daphne, that's much more difficult at the minute. And it is something, like Brian said, that we've been asked about quite a lot, but doing it in a generic way is difficult. But hosting your own and powering it through Daphne, that's totally fine.
Okay, I think we probably should move on. We've still got quite a lot of questions. So Andy, you've made a comment and you've asked what's the first application targeted, which will be held up to show value.
I think that's already been addressed. I think that was picked up by Daniel quite nicely earlier. So yeah, that's done. Thanks.
Okay. So we can.
Unless anyone else wants to comment on it, obviously. But
yes.
Yeah, in the interest of getting through the questions, I'm satisfied.
And would we get a message when run is complete, or do we need to log on and check? So this is Tom and Rose, I think, here.
Yeah, not at the moment, unfortunately. So you would still need to log in and check. We have built a notification service, which is in still very early stages because it's kind of seen as a nice to have. But hopefully that would provide that kind of level of detail, so you could select when your workflow finishes that you want to be emailed about it. We understand that if it's a long running thing, you don't want to keep logging in to check it. So it's something we thought about. It's just not been fully developed yet.
Okay. And in the workflow, is it possible to pass the outputs of multiple models in inputs to a single model?
I can answer this one. Yes, is the short answer. So the drop down that I showed off, where it had a list of the models, that was actually, it's a multi-select drop down, so you can select multiple models to take the outputs from and then input them into a single model. Also, with the publish step, you can do the same thing. You can specify to take outputs from as many models as you want. I just happen to pass the results along in that workflow until the final one, just because it requires fewer clicks then to actually create the workflow.
Okay, and how does one trace an output to a specific versions of code and data used to generate it? Quite technical questions here. Tom and Rose, again, if you could help out.
Yeah, so I showed the ways of tracing back from that output data set through into the workflow instance, and then I think we've talked about GitHub integration and potentially linking to specific commit versions. So yeah, I think that's been covered.
We'll be sharing the videos with everyone afterwards, so you can re-look back if you want to check that out. I think we might have covered this slightly. I guess this again is for Christian and Daniel. Is there any engagement with logistics companies so they may reroute their vehicles in line with your predictions?
Yeah, I think that's the question that I was linking with the other one earlier. I thought they were related, so I think we covered this one. Yeah.
Okay. And then Patricio is obviously agreeing with the fact that the sensor data is not always perfect. Christian, do you want to come in and address any of these points?
I can talk a bit about the sensor data that we've been using, for the model. As I said, even in my talk, not all the sensors are active at all the times. So there are periods in which the sensor that you want to calculate the prediction for is not active. So therefore, the model won't work. That's why we will have those checks in the pre-processing stages in which we, even for the latest measurements, we do the same checks. And if the data that we get for the sensor that we want to do the prediction for doesn't pass those checks, then we don't go ahead with the prediction. We return an error and say, well, we don't have enough data, or we think that there is something wrong with the pattern that we're seeing and these measurements are not correct. Of course, the idea is that then these blocks of missing data or outlier detection would then be updated regularly with newer algorithms that come up, and that's one of the advantages of having a collaborative environment, so that we can update the missing data block with a better algorithm, and we can update the outlier detection with a better approach later as we go higher up in those maturity levels. So very good point about quality of data.
I mean, it's also worth mentioning that this is not a new problem, and there's a lot of research, in this area. I mean, if you think about data assimilation for weather prediction, so this is you can see the model that is used currently by the weather forecasters as another digital twin of the weather system. And that's something that they've been doing successfully for many years. And this is a problem that has been addressed, and a lot of research work in this area. But clearly, it's central to being able to update your model, to be able to tell when the data that you're using is actually of the right quality. So yes, it's something that is important, but also it's not new. So you can already go to get off-the-shelves methodologies that can be implemented depending on the type of data and anomalies that you expect to see.
And yeah, I think one way to handle it, of course, is not to try and input the data, but to kind of handle it as uncertainty increasing in your model. I think that there are techniques to do that, but it's still a challenge to articulate that to the end users. And that's one of the things that even weather forecasts still struggle with, I think, is to capture really the uncertainty. And if you don't tell people it's going to rain definitely, they'll be annoyed because you're not giving them any useful information. But when you get it wrong, you're also chastised for them getting wet. So I think it's a really difficult balance as to how to interact with how uncertainty interacts with the decisions that need to be made that are inherently discrete and binary in some sense.